Right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Take Flight podcast. This is episode number 139, and your favorite quartet are back for a jam packed group episode. Now, today we are discussing a very hot topic right now, and it's a word that you are potentially hearing and seeing everywhere. We are talking about a recession. Now, in the news nowadays, it's hard to avoid certain words coming up a lot: inflation, price increases, interest rate rises, redundancies, market sell offs, everything is up in the air and indicating that we are either heading towards or already in a recession. So, what can we do to prepare? Now, in this episode, we share our observations in terms of what we are seeing personally, data points, and from a business macro perspective. Then we shift gear into a constructive dialogue in terms of how we can all get ready for a potential recession and for what's potentially coming. And then to close out the episode, we share our predictions on if, when, and how long will this recession last. Now, an important caveat for this episode: this podcast is for information purposes only. Matters discussed are not intended to provide and should not be relied on as investment, accounting, legal, or tax advice or recommendation. The views and opinions presented are those of the four podcasters and or our guests, and these may of course change. Now, we advise that you seek and or obtain independent professional advice in relation to your personal circumstances. Now, finally, before the music hits, if you have 5 seconds, please remember to subscribe on whichever platform you use to listen to us. Leave a review on Spotify now. You can also leave reviews. And in case you do want to see our faces, our amazing producer, Nandi, has uploaded all our content on YouTube. So please subscribe there too. Now, let's hit the music and get into this meaty episode.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
All right, guys, we are back for a group episode, and it feels like it's been a while. So let's do our usual check-ins. Daniel, how are you feeling? Because I feel like you've just come from a great period. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well, feeling a bit jet lagged. For those who don't know, I spent a bit of time in the US last week in New York and Atlanta for some work and pleasure as well. But feeling rejuvenated, revitalized, and just thinking about the outlook in the future, and it's looking very bright.
Daniel, one quick question. When was the last time you last went to the US, and any immediate reflections from that time versus now?
The last time I went to the US was in November 2019 for Thanksgiving, so just 3 months shy of the pandemic before that began. But my last time in New York, coincidentally, was in 2016. And from my last time there 6 years ago, things have changed considerably. I think we're going to touch on it, this topic, but the price of goods has skyrocketed. The place just seems dirtier than before, if I'm honest. But I think there are so many good new things that have happened and developed in the area. But of course, my time there was very brief, so I can't really speak for it on a grand scale. But it was nevertheless, it was good to be back. Good to see family as well and see the team.
And it's great to see the Daniel Johnson of old in the last 12 months, jet setting around the world again. I miss that Daniel energy, so it's good to have you back, Daniel.
Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to my next trip next month.
Right,
it's gonna be great. Gonna be great.
He's ready. Love it. 2022
great.
Daniel energy is the goal. That's the benchmark.
Pete,
Olu, how are you doing?
I'm good. I can't complain. No, but I echo what you said. It's good to see Daniel traveling again, watching his stories, getting his feedback. If you're part of his close friends group, you get so much insight into Daniel's travel experience, and there's always a joy. And I'm sure from 2016, the difference is the pound versus the US. So you're feeling that inflation and the FX impact there. But on my side, I'm good. Life is good. Reaching a busy time in regards to work. So just really trying to focus on that for the next 2 weeks. And then I'm going to try to take a leaf out of Daniel's book and start to jet set, take a couple of trips. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those trips.
Where you going? Southend on Sea.
Because of this topic, and we're talking about recession and inflation, it
might
have to be a UK trip, maybe Brighton or somewhere by the seaside. We'll see.
All right, but that's good to hear, Olin. I'm sure we'll get the chance to catch up together in an international environment sometime next month, which should be fun. And good luck with your first quarter close in your new role as well. So I think that's going to be a good learning period. P, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. All good. Thankful, feeling good. Optimizing the routine, just trying to reach peak state in the gym, working the body, working the mind. Good. I'm in a good spirit, good space. Family's good, no complaints. So and
you
then
say
we're slowly
working-
coming into summer period. So
you say work in the body.
yeah, working on the body, working on the mind.
Can't tell.
Oh, is
Can't
it?
tell.
That one I'll give you. But yeah, no, sure, all good.
But it's good to hear, P. And I think this is a good window to give these jibes about physical appearance, because God willing, we will all be meeting together in person in the month of August, which is roughly about 8 weeks from now. And I think then would be the true test in terms of who's been really working out and who's been doing some other things. So that'd be
looking at those stomachs.
Give
trust me.
give that Geneva tap. That Geneva tap.
Not this time.
Oh, but it'll be great. And I think for the listeners, you may be the Geneva tap is a story for another time. But we actually, since we started this podcast, we mentioned this a couple of times, we haven't had the chance to be in the same room together, and also with our producer Nandi. And I think the plan is in August to meet together and to take at least a picture together and some catch up. So it should be good. And just to close out the check-ins on my side, all good. I was actually having catch up with one of my colleagues earlier today, and the way that I framed it is that I think the next 8 to 12 weeks are the last few games of the season, and there's a potential treble in the pipeline. I just need to make sure that I fire across all cylinders. But it's going to be a busy period, but hopefully fruitful by the end of summer. We just keep pushing through. But then with that, let's transition into this meaty topic that we have in terms of a recession, and are I ready for a recession? Now, just to kick off the episode, just to give us all a framing in terms of what a recession is. Some people may not be familiar with what it means. So I think at the moment, everyone, or a lot of people, majority of people, are feeling the pinch as the cost of living has quickly morphed into somewhat of a crisis in different parts of the world, and especially in the UK. Gas and oil prices have skyrocketed, and we can expect further energy price hikes later in the year. So the question is it really time to buckle up and prepare for the worst, or can we do anything in anticipation of that? Now, probably everyone is aware, and you've seen it on the news, inflation, so that's the rate of price increasing, has continued to soar, and the cost of living has hit households across the country. And some experts are predicting another recession. So just a clear framing, what is a recession? The technical definition of a recession is when an economy contracts over 2 consecutive quarters. So that's 6 months. Now, it's generally accepted that when an economy does this, it has entered a recession, and that is measured primarily by its gross domestic product. So essentially the output that's being created by that country. So the Bank of England, they have technically not yet predicted a recession. However, they do expect a huge downturn towards the end of this year, with a contraction of almost 1% between October and December. And they're estimating that next year, the GDP is forecasted to be below 2022 levels throughout the whole of 2023, with growth expected to average out at 0 for the next 12 months. So it looks like a recession might be on the cards. Now, just some other facts before we open up for a discussion with the group. What might cause another UK recession? So there's multiple factors. In isolation, nothing looks so big, but they are big challenges when you combine them all together. We've had lockdowns in the UK, slowing down economy, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine impacting gas and oil, and then now, of course, the volatile climate that we see in the financial markets as well. This has led to a sharp rise in household bills. Since April, it's estimated that there's been a 54% jump in gas and electricity, and the Bank of England believe that costs will rise even further in October by as much as 40%. And this will take the average domestic bills for households to more than £2,800 a year, while also interest rates are expected to hit levels not seen in more than 30 years. So that's to set the scene, guys, a little bit. And now let's open up for a group discussion in terms of what you are all observing from your perspectives, whether it's personal, business, macro. Who would like to kick off the discussion?
I don't mind kicking off. Sure, I think that was a really good introduction in regards to just setting the stage, what technically a recession means. I would say the last few months, years, has felt like a economics lesson, right? So Daniel and P, we all study the same course in university, and you hear about recessions, you hear about the Great Depression, the financial crisis, but we haven't really lived through a real financial crisis like we're going through right now. And I think one of my sort of key observations is the first thing I tried to do was really just differentiate what are the different elements that we're facing, right? Because, like you mentioned, a recession is when on 2 quarters there's a slowdown in GDP. So, technically, based on that definition, we're not in a recession, right? The Q2 results are going to come out soon, and potentially we're going to find out that we're actually technically in a recession, and that's completely fine. But I think what's different within this particular time and other recessions that we faced is we're seeing so many different factors being impacted at the same time. So we're seeing inflation coming, and inflation is like predictable inflation is okay, right? Typically, we expect between 2% of inflation year over year. The problem here that we're facing is really uncontrolled inflation. Uncontrolled inflation, and also that uncontrolled inflation is impacting the cost of living, right? Because if we saw inflation only in, let's say, the stock market, impacting the stock market, or maybe like the house prices, maybe we want to have such a massive impact on people's households. But this sort of inflation is impacting all consumables, right? And what I mean, she was mentioned, cost of gas. We've seen that skyrocket. We've seen rental prices go up, right? We've seen the cost of food. So this is an element where no one is safe. It's not just a situation that your cash is losing value, is you've got so much fixed cost that you're just having to pay more than you used to pay 6 months ago, a year ago. So I think that's the first thing. And I try to sort of deep dive and understand inflation, what impacts inflation. And when I think about that, right, I think of it as prices. Inflation is increase in prices. Okay, what impacts prices? It's really supply and demand. We've had a shortage when it comes to supply due to COVID, the lockdown. So many companies stopped their manufacturing. We've seen a shortages of chips. That's one element. And now we're seeing supply just skyrocket. And the reason why supply has gone up is, one, there's just been so much free money in the market. So we talk about interest rates as well. And you realize that money was so cheap. Interest rates were so low. Like, we felt lower than 1% interest rates. And we got to a point where we thought that was the norm. Sometimes you'll talk to your parents and they'll say, oh, I remember when I was getting my first house, mortgage rates were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. We couldn't fathom that or imagine those sort of interest rates because we never lived through that time. So there's something called risk-free money, right? And because now we're seeing interest rates go up, people are starting to demand better returns for their money. So what this is really just causing is, it's causing a situation that the only way that you can control this inflation, and what the Treasury, the Fed in the US, what they try to do is, the way you control it is by increasing your interest rates. So now by this, again, it felt like an economic lesson, but this is more real because you're actually experiencing this in real time. But you're going through understanding what impacts inflation, understanding how you control inflation, which is increasing interest rates, which hopefully by increasing your interest rates, you're making it more expensive for people to borrow money, which then should mean that they will slow down. But now the problem that you face with that is, if people slow down their spending, this would now start to impact the earnings of so many different companies. So then you start to see a GDP decline and a recession hit. So for me, it's tough to go through this, right? And I think we haven't seen the final straw of a recession, I'll say, where you start to see a lot of unemployment, right? I think unemployment is still holding up, where we haven't seen a large amount of layoffs. We're starting to see it in some of the big tech companies, but we're not really seeing a massive one now. So right now, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, one, I'm learning a lot, right? Because this is our first real recession that we're going through as adults, people making income, investors, business owners. How can I learn as much as possible? Research and look at historical recessions, and then we'll talk about later on in this episode, but prepare for this recession. Because whenever I think of recession or recession coming up, I think of really two elements. I think of protect, and we'll go through some of the things you can do to protect yourself. And then I think about exploit. And exploit is such a dirty word, right? When you hear the word exploit. But we live in a capitalist world, and a lot of wealth is generated through a recession. So understanding, okay, what are the ways that you can exploit the recession and try to build some level of generational wealth that's going to last you 10, 20, 30 years. So I'll stop there and pass it on to the other guys because I don't want to mention all the points, but that's
Although
sort of my first observation.
No, and Olu, I think you really unpacked a lot there from a macro perspective and really explained in terms of what we're seeing, not just in the UK, but also globally and the repercussions of that from a macro level. So thanks a lot for sharing. And then maybe looking towards Daniel or P in terms of who can maybe share maybe what you're seeing from a personal anecdotal basis or what you're observing a bit closer to home.
Yeah, I can go, certainly. Just I wanted to say firstly, when there's talks of recession, I think there's the fear factor that you keep repeating it, and that's what affects consumer spending. So inevitably, there will be a recession. And I recall correctly, if I don't recall correctly, I think it was November or October last year, P put on his status, we are in a recession because of the way the market was moving. And it's not that we have to wait for them to officially announce it, because when they officially announce it, it doesn't mean from that day we're in a recession. We could have been in a recession for a period of time prior to them officially announcing it. But anyway, that aside,
Daniel, did P actually say this?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, I'm literally. Go on, Daniel, finish and let me.
Okay, you're ahead of the game. Okay.
But I was going to say from a more personal point of view, and kind of how it's impacting me and my family. You know, we are heavy. We drive, and I'll share some numbers with you. So, for example, our gas and electric bill prior to the price increase, which occurred in April, we're paying £60 a month for gas and electricity combined. We got a letter or an email in March, in the March period, saying from the 7th of April, your gas and electric is going to rise to £160 per month. So already that's £100 on top of what we were originally paying. Mm-hmm. And that's for the same consumption. Nothing changed, nothing different, but it's extra £100 a month. Year on year, that's an extra £1,200, just like that. And we're on probably a cheaper tariff compared to others. I know others that will pay maybe 120 or whatever it may be, and others, then their providers are saying they're going to be paying £300 a month. And the thing is, what people didn't know is many people between October last year and April changed provider, which meant they didn't have that protection. So that potentially their gas or electric company could charge them whatever they wanted, and they had nothing they could do about it. So we hadn't changed provider. We kept with who we were, even when it was time to renew last year, because we anticipated this was going to happen. We thought, okay, the best thing we can do is to stay with our current provider. On another personal note, we drive diesel. We have a 70-litre tank. And boy, let's just say, Melissa said she went to fill up last week. She said she paid £117 to fill up the tank. And I was
Madness.
like, boy. And usually we fill up the tank like every 2 weeks. But I say we don't. Okay, I would say we fill up the tank. We have this thing where we don't let the tank, the gauge fall below half. So every time it reaches half, we just top it up. So we just top it up. We keep topping it up. But I noticed every time I'm topping it up, it's now getting to about £70 to top up from half tank. £75 from half tank. Before it was like £40, £50, and now it's like, whoa, when is this thing stopping? I'm holding it, looking at the numbers. The numbers ain't stopping. The numbers are not stopping. And we buy our fuel from Costco, where it tends to be kind of the cheaper place to buy it rather than Shell or BP. If you got deep pockets, definitely go to Shell or BP. Oh boy, your pockets won't be deep for long. So yeah, I'll tell you for free. But yeah, so we can definitely see it and feel it in just terms of a day-to-day living cost. Also, Melissa does the shopping, and she's been saying for about a good 8-9 months now, it's getting more expensive. Every time she goes to do a food shop, we don't necessarily do like big food shops. We just go on a weekly basis. We buy what we need, and she's finding that she's buying less goods for a greater sum. So she'll often come home and say, "How much do you think I paid for this?" I'm like, £20. She's like, "No, 50." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Things are getting expensive. But I'll tell you when it hit me. I think I shared this with P the other day. You know the bottle of Schlur, like the non-alcoholic fizzy drink. How much do you usually buy that for when it's on offer?
It's £1 or less.
It's £1. It's £1 on offer. Schlur, white grape, red berry, whatever it is. You know, you can just a 3 glasses and it's done. Yeah, it's done. I saw this 1 litre bottle in Sainsbury's. No, sorry, no, in Asda. Sorry, Sainsbury's is always expensive. In Asda for £2.40. I said, what? I said, inflation is real. Inflation is real, because what many people aren't also seeing is, and a lot of manufacturers are saying it, that they're giving the same price, but the quantity is smaller. We've all known from days, Quality Street used to be big old aluminium tin, now plastic, this thick, 10 chocolates in there, 2 fudge, 2 country fudge, 3 toffee coins. No, forget it. They're ripping us off big time. But I tell you when it really hit me, last week in New York. I always knew New York was expensive. I walk in to 7-Eleven to buy not even Fiji water. It was Essential Plus water. I don't even know if that's a good brand, but I was looking for what's more economic and cheap. For a 1 litre bottle, $4 for 1 bottle of water. I thought inflation is this is not a joke. It's really, really, really getting expensive. And what it's made me think is, I'm not rich. Am I feeling the squeeze? Yeah, definitely feeling the squeeze. You can definitely feel like, yeah, this is starting to become out of hand. But for those who are now having to decide between gas and electric or food, we're in, okay, we're not, okay, we're technically in summer. We know UK doesn't really have a summer, but the weather's warmer. But when it hits October, when gas and electric is going to increase further, and the cost of living and food prices are even greater, it's quite a scary sight for those who, you know, will be struggling. And it's not nice. It's never nice to see other people suffer or in hardship, especially when you want to help, but you may not be able to help, but you want to help. I'll pause there, but all I'll say is, from a personal level, day-to-day living, definitely seeing an increase. Definitely seeing things becoming more expensive. Definitely seeing every trip, the fuel is depleting, the price is becoming more expensive. And it's not to say that you shouldn't live your life and enjoy it. It's just that you have to be very careful. And I think we'll go into the steps of how we're each preparing to, you know, to sort of account for the cost of living increase.
No, Daniel, I think that's yeah.
And Daniel, that last point that you made, I'm not sure if you guys know, was it a few months ago, the guy that's in charge of Money Supermarket, they did an interview with him. Martin Lewis did an interview.
I have no more solutions for you.
He says the cost crisis that we're in right now, the cost of living crisis that we're in, I have no more solutions for you guys. And that's how bad it is. And I think that's the part where it's scary. I think a lot of us on this call are fortunate that we have good jobs, we have some level of safety if it's family, friends that can protect us. But there's a large population where, like Daniel said, they've got to make the decision of, do we have heating or do we have food? And that's where there needs to be a serious solution, which I don't know what the answer is. And I think one of the biggest frustration I have is a lot of people saying, oh, it's because of the war in Ukraine. I don't listen to that. That's not the reason. Like, it might have accelerated where we are, but we've been heading in this direction for a long period of time. And what Daniel mentioned in terms of the gas and electricity and the fact that there's no cap in terms of how much, in certain cases, how much companies can charge, for me, that's disgusting.
And just a plus one on that, because these things were accelerated prior to the Ukraine-Russia tension. That should not be used as an excuse. Really and truly, that should not be used as an excuse by the government. And when you talk about the cost of living, you know, average pay increases aren't keeping pace with inflation. Figures from the Office of National Statistics show that wages, excluding bonuses, rose by 4.2% between February and April. But when you take into account inflation, regular pay actually fell 2.2% compared to 12 months ago. So those are key figures you also have to see, is that inflation's increase is rising, wages aren't. And when what was mentioned earlier about Olu saying that usually when inflation is increasing, they will try and curb that with interest rates. But when inflation is caused by external forces such as rising global energy prices, then there's very much a limit to how effective UK interest rate rises can be. I'm going to give it to P now, because P's been sharing about, even went to oil and gas companies, how much their shareholders taking in bonuses, all of that. P, run it.
No, the only thing I wanted to go on, Ollie, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, were you going to expose the fact that I was selling some of my oil and gas?
No, I wasn't going to say that. No, just very quickly, because I know we want to move on to perhaps the next chapter of the discussion. But I just wanted to sort of circle back onto Ollie. I think you made a great point, which is a lot of what we're talking about today is really, if you're taking notes generally in life, you're going through a real education. This is like, for me, I believe since the beginning of 2020, it's been an economic, MBA, right? And I think the thing I wanted just to quickly add is, whenever you have the Bank of England printing in around 500 billion, right, and injecting that into the market through quantitative easing, at some point within the next 24 to 36 months, you're going to have this turbulence that we have today. So for me, I actually, one of the things to what Daniel was saying, I believe we've actually been in a recession for quite some time now. I think what we are in now is maybe some more severe than maybe the back end of 2021. But I think it's been quite a dear situation for the UK economy in particular since they started printing that money. So I think again, inflation is no surprise where inflation is. You could have predicted that back in 2020 based on the printing. You could also then understand, based on how economics work, that you need to then obviously raise interest rates. And we're also going to see an effect and move on taxes as well. So a lot of what we're seeing today could have easily been predicted 2 years ago. I think the question is just the extent to what is actually happening. But I think the last thing I'll say is it's a real lesson for all of us, because I think, Ollie, you mentioned a great point, which is for our generation, we were at university when this was perhaps taking place last time, right? And as we know, based on historical data, a recession happens every 10 years. So a lot to learn, and people shouldn't sort of go through this period and sort of not hope for it to end, but just it's nothing. There's a lot to take away from this. But yeah, sure.
No, I love it, and I think you guys have really the macro framing that Olu had, and then some of the micro examples that Daniel has seen in day to day. And I think, P, the way that you've put it together, I think that's we perfectly covered in terms of what we are observing from our perspective in terms of this potential recession or recession that we are already in. But maybe we can shift gear into more of a constructive discussion in terms of, okay, so those are the facts on the table, but what can we do next to make sure that we are all best prepared, that our families are best prepared, that our businesses are best prepared? So really, how can we get ready, and how you, the listener, can also be ready for this period that we are potentially going through? So who would like to kick off in terms of what they're personally doing now for the next 6 to 12? How about P, you kick us off for this one?
Yeah, so I think there's only one solution. There's only one solution to the situation that we find ourselves in. I think one is to change mindset, because it's how you perceive recession, right, as an environment, as a context. Just because potentially a market is contracting, it doesn't mean that you have to as an individual. It doesn't mean that you have to as a family unit. So I think, one, changing the mindset, because I think fear drives a certain level of decisions that actually make you inactive. So trying to look at more the positive aspects and perspectives from a recession. Where are the opportunities? And I think Olu can sort of further elaborate on that. But the only solution that I believe that people should try to understand, and it might be difficult to swallow when you're actually going through an environment where everywhere you turn, the prices are increasing, is you have to find ways to increase your income. And the reason being is because you can only reduce your expenses by so much. And I think the reason why I say that is because right now, probably people are probably looking at their expense base and saying, where can I cut costs? Where can I cut costs? And you'll find you're sort of running into a brick wall. What you have to do is say to yourself, okay, I need to basically look at my skills and my service and understand what skills am I developing, what service am I providing. Whether it's a corporate situation or as an entrepreneur, the question is still the same. and I need to find ways to keep increasing my income. And it's I don't think people want to have that conversation. I don't think people want to sort of face that music. They sort of say, maybe there's something in my cost base, but the only way to survive in a recession is to focus on increasing your top line. And the other thing I'll also just quickly add as well, we're talking about the market, we're talking about macro perspectives. People should start to look a little bit at their personal economy. So what drives an economy, right, is spending, your ability to spend, your ability to invest. So when an economy stops spending, as we see in today, because people have loss of confidence and not spending, it starts to contract. As I mentioned before, just because the market is potentially contracting, it doesn't mean that you have to, right? So there are still opportunities to spend and invest into opportunities. There are still opportunities to increase your income. So that for me is what I believe personally is the only solution and the way to take on what's coming over the next 24 months.
Love it, P. Thanks a lot. Anyone would like to go next to build on? Ollie?
I can add. So I think at the beginning I spoke about really two phases, right? And when I think of a recession and going into a recession, you really got to think about it from the two sides of a coin. You've got the protect element, and then you've got the exploit element. So and P's mentioned a few of them, and I'll just go. So if we just focus on protect, so how do you protect yourself, your family, your friends, and your business? I think the first thing you want to do is, how do you protect your job? So one thing you learn through a recession is, or it becomes more apparent during a recession, is how important your individual skill is, and how can you upskill so that you become to a point where you're irreplaceable in your workplace, right? So that could be, and we should have been doing this even prior to a recession, if it's new training, new skills, new qualifications, where your employer, if they're going to make that tough decision, they're like, damn, we can't let go of Shawel. He's got an MBA, he's doing this. Like, nah, we can't get rid of him. And even if they do, you know what? Shawel can pick up the phone to a competitor and say, hey, I've got my MBA, I've got these qualifications, this is my experience. You can get another job. So how do you protect yourself? I think a second element of it, which people don't realize how important is that cash is king. Now, a lot of people like to say cash is trash, invest it, get rid of it, whatever, etc. I think when you get into a recession, and even with this inflation element, you realize how important cash is for two standpoints. One, from a standpoint of emergency fund. So if you are to lose your job, do you have 3 months, 6 months of emergency fund where you could protect yourself and your family? And then secondly, do you have cash there where you can be ready to deploy it? And that's the exploit part, which I'll cover later. But do you have cash ready that you can exploit and invest? Now, some people will say, oh, but we've got a 9% inflation. Your cash is worth 9%. Hey, if I had that in Netflix, that's down 75% or 70%. 9% doesn't sound that bad in comparison to it, right? So cash is king. Next thing is really, are you able to lock in any variable or any of your interest rates, right? We're going to see interest rates go up. So if you're someone that's got variable interest rates on your mortgages or other elements, is there opportunity for you to lock that in? And this interest rate thing is not something where people can sit on their high horse and say, oh, look at the people just buying houses now. You guys are going to pay high interest rates. Guess what? All your mortgages are going to go through remortgaging, and you're going to come out your fixed period, and you're going to have to sign up to a new interest rate. Everyone is going to feel it, right? But if you're in a variable one, how can you protect yourself? Lock yourself in maybe for 2-5 years. Like Shawel said, we're not your financial advisors. Speak to your financial advisor. This is what I'm doing. Next element in that protection side is going through your budgeting. So you want to understand, what are you spending your money on, and what is inflation, recession sort of impacted. So like, there's elements that you can't control. You got to spend on food, right? But hey, myself, instead of me doing Uber Eats or Deliveroo, where that service charge or delivery charge is going up, maybe I could cook at home. So understanding your budget, understanding where you're spending, where can you save or cut back on, and even have the conversation with your partner or even yourself to say, hey, scenario test. If I was to lose my job, what are some of the things we could cut back on? or not? And hey, when you cut back on that money, it's not just so that you keep it there, which we'll talk about on the exploit part, is how do you prepare and get money ready so that you can start to invest? And then the last sort of protect point that I will say is, which a lot of companies, and this is more businesses, is be careful of your leverage and how much debt you carry. And I think so many businesses are going to go out of business due to the fact they've got such a high debt level and they're not making enough income or profit associated to that. Same with us personally. We invest in property, right? A lot of people have purchased properties that are overvalued. If there's a slight pullback on it, you might get to a negative equity position. So during that period of time, are you able to do some repayments so that you could protect yourself from that negative equity? And then the second side of that coin is, how do you exploit? So exploiting means that during this period of time where people are fearful, this is the best time to invest. Now, personally, myself, right, I think the last sort of few months has been realization. I'll say a realization into generational wealth, into finance and investing, right? In 2020, we saw a massive correction in which I invested a lot of money into the markets. We saw really big growths. In 2021, last year, if I'm honest, I didn't invest that much into the market because I wasn't excited. Everything was just so overpriced, right? In 2021, I didn't buy any crypto. I didn't buy any of my Apple stocks. The only thing I pretty much purchased was oil and gas stocks, and that's because I get a discount. I get a discount on it, and it wasn't as highly valued. Right now, I've started to become excited again to invest in the market because I've seen such massive corrections in the market where I'm like, okay, Amazon has gone down by a certain amount. This is now the nice time to buy it. If I was willing to buy Amazon when it was at all-time highs, why am I not excited to buy it when it's 30% down? If I'm excited to buy Facebook when it was 50% higher, why wouldn't I be excited to buy it now? So this is the time. There's a saying that is, when people are greedy, that's when you should be fearful and say, there's too much valuation increasing, bubbles. Let me stay out the market, because doing nothing is not a bad thing. But now when everyone's fearful and you're seeing these massive corrections where we don't get that many of these corrections in our lifetime, this is the best time to be investing, increase your investing there. And the biggest thing I will say to people, right, is do not sell, right? We have seen there's been multiple recessions over the years. And each time there's been a recession, there's been a recovery in most of the top businesses, and the indexes has always gone up and recovered. So please, please, please don't be forced to sell just because you see a correction. If you were if you were planning to invest for 10, 20, 30 years, this is a small dip in the grand scheme of 30 years. So don't be forced to sell. Now, I can understand you reallocating. You might say, hey, I had my money in Netflix. I don't really believe in the philosophy of Netflix or whatever. Don't put that into cash. You might want to reallocate that to another company like Amazon, Facebook, whatever you think makes sense, and see that go up. But don't be forced or out of fear to sell your money. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing. Again, not financial advice, but I've split into what am I doing to protect myself and what am I doing to exploit. And right now, I've already, like yesterday, I basically increased all my investments into the stock markets, etc. Because I'm like, hey, these investments are 10, 20 years. In 10, 20 years time, I'm sure it's going to increase.
Love that. And I think for the listeners, there was a lot to unpack there from Olu and Pabilo. But what I love about that is two different frameworks that you could potentially use. And it's definitely worth rewinding that and taking a pen and paper and making some notes from both Pabilo and Olu's frameworks, because I think there's a lot of value there that you can combine even to a plan that works for you. But Daniel, do you want to build on Olu and P's frameworks?
I'll be very short. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. Buckle up,
man.
Buckle up. It's gonna be a wild ride. No, I think Olu and P shared some great insights and some personal points that I think are very appropriate and apposite for us all, irrespective of the journey we're on. But no, to some, yeah, to some element, I'm joking about buckle up, but it's not gonna be a 3-month period. It's gonna be like 18 to 24 months. So
Minimum.
it's gonna be for an extensive period of time. We are age to haven't experienced this because we're at university. But Ollie was mentioning quite a few things there, and it reminded me of Warren Buffett's quote: "Only when the tide goes out, you discover who's been swimming naked." But I think it's really a mindset thing, as P mentioned as well, because whilst many people say interest rates go up, save your money, it doesn't help the economy. You don't get out of a recession by everyone holding on to money. People need to keep spending for us to get out of a recession. You need to keep the spending habits up. Of course, you have to be very smart with how you spend, but you can't not spend. Otherwise, it's going to be a recession for a very long, extensive period of time. But I do think it's all about the mindset, because we could be in a recession right now, and unless the B of E announced that we're in a recession, or the ONS announced we're in a recession, everyone will continue as they are. And I've always been intrigued by who benefits from a recession, because ultimately there has to be a winner. We can't all be losers. There has to be winners. There's some very weird things that you discover when you do such research and searches on who benefits. For one, Olu was mentioning about Uber Eats, but ultimately grocery stores benefit because people aren't buying takeaways. People aren't going out to eat. They're going to buy the ingredients to cook a meal. They want meals to last longer, to feed the family, do bulk meal prep. The sweets industry, funnily enough, benefit as well, because even in the recession in 2007, 2009, Cadbury profits increased by 30%. Nestle increased profits by 11%. And even I think some of these old chocolates like Snickers, Mars bars, and I think Tootsie Rolls in the US were actually invented in the Great Depression. So things do come out from such things. Even bars kind of benefit. People tend to be a bit down to do their binge drinking, the alcoholic consumption. But yeah, I think in tough times people tend to turn to such things. But I just, from a different angle and different perspective, who can benefit. There are many things, and like P mentioned, there are always opportunities. I've shared it before. Crisis in Japanese in kanji spells danger and opportunity. And it's really your perspective. What do you want to believe in? Where do you see your side of what pendulum do you see your side swinging on? Because yes, it can be tough, but there are also opportunities that are going to exist. When we saw the .com boom, many companies went bust, but then some of the greatest companies came from that burst. And similar right now in the tech industry, tech stocks are down 70 to 80%. Things are going to emerge in the Web3 space that are going to be here for decades to come. So whilst it's not necessarily nice to live in, we also have to think about what opportunities, to Ollie's point, can we exploit? Where can we identify opportunities that will, right now, it can be painful, but long term, will flourish, will thrive.
Love that, Daniel, and I love the optimism and the constructive nature of that advice as well. And I think it really put a lot of people in a strong position. I think what's been great about listening to you guys is there's such a various different pathways that you can take during this 18 to 24 month period that we're going to go through. But I think you can pull advice from all of those elements and put together a great plan for yourself. I think from my side, and what I love about it is I've even got my own framework as well. So that's why I was laughing a little bit, the way that P and Ollie were framing theirs, and Daniel was showing his in terms of the multilingual Japanese element as well. Daniel, that's a nice bonus to chuck in. I think on my side, it's a framework that I've shared as well. So it's really around education, exposure, and expansion. So the way that education element works, I think during this period, and Ollie already alluded to it earlier, if you can double down on your own skill set that you have, your own education, it doesn't necessarily need to be a formal education that you part a lot of money for, but it could just be being knowledgeable in areas, listening to podcasts, listening to Take Flight podcasts, for example, watching YouTube videos, watching the news, being more in tune with what's going on in the Financial Times. All of these elements will keep you educated and keep you sharp. I think being sharp during this period that we're going to go through is going to be very, very important and really will separate you from the pack. So that education element is the first part. The exposure element is the bit where your network that you are exposed to, they need to know what you're doing, who you're doing it with, what you're working on, and you cannot afford to disappear in the next 6 to 24 months. Whatever space you're in, whether it's your own business, whether you're working in a company, any space that you're in, the people around you need to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and who you're doing it with. And this network will go a very long way, because during that period, some people will disappear. You won't hear about some people, and it'll be difficult to find them. But the ones that really stick out and continue to double down, whether it's individuals or companies, are really the ones that will be set up for success in the long term. So I think all of us individually need to ensure that we're keeping that exposure up. And the last piece now, and I love how everyone's mentioned it in different ways, but it's really this expansion element. So for me personally, during the last 2 years, there were moments where I was thinking, and I think P and I have shared this at the beginning of the pandemic. P and I were looking at a joint deal together, and it was quite a sizable deal at that time. But the pandemic had just kicked in, and we weren't sure whether we go in or not. And then we paused because we wanted to see what the market was going to do. And then we decided that actually let's individually build what we're doing, and then we'll continue to build together at a later date. Now, many other people at that point completely stopped to push forward. But the difference was that we continued to expand, and that has now 2 years on put us in a great position now. And this has helped me to double down in some of the best relationships during the last 2 years. This has helped to change career tracks. This has helped to invest in my education. And all of these has put me at a much stronger position than I would have been 2 years ago if I didn't. And all of these guys that you're listening to on the podcast have done this in different elements in different areas. But that's why I think really in the next 2 years, we are in a great position. And I just really recommend to all the listeners that during this period it's very easy to retreat, but if you can find your areas of strength and to expand, then you can really separate yourself from a big part of the population to push on for you, your family, and those around you. Just the last one, and this is a bonus one, is really to think in the next couple of years to continue to prioritize your health, because times will get tough. Stress levels will probably increase. Your appetite to sleep may reduce. Rising food prices, rising energy prices, this can add to a lot of stress. But it's during that period that good sleep, movement, nutrition, all of these elements can help underpin a great performance period during the next 12 to 24 months. And it will be rough, but I think with all of that you've heard from all the co-hosts and the great advice, really will put us all in a strong position. And I've learned a lot from this episode as well. So just to wrap up, the big piece, the juicy piece, predictions. I think P, you've already shared a prediction. I think Daniel, you also alluded to a prediction in terms of how long will this period potentially last, and when could we see a potential end to a recession? Any additional predictions, or maybe you can recap the ones that you shared earlier in the episode.
So for me,
Yeah, I think we're just
go
given
on.
a time frame. I think 18 to 24 months at the very minimum people should expect, right? So that's the time window that I'm looking at.
So we're looking at 2024 is when
2024. The sun doesn't shine. The sun doesn't shine until 2025. Go on, Ollie.
It's funny because Pete, that's the average length of a recession. That's exactly spot on in terms of average time. So did you Google that, or is this?
No, that's just, I'm telling you, since 2020, I could have told you all of this.
Yeah, so that's actually the average time. The longest sort of downturn we've seen was 65 months. And the Great Depression was 43 months, which I don't think we're in the Great Depression. So for me, I think realistically, I'm gonna go different from you guys, right? And I'm gonna go with, we're gonna see this resolved in 12 months. I'm saying 12 months.
But
I'm gonna say a quicker time.
There's a reason why you're saying that. What do you think?
So the reason why I think that is because,
what's your thoughts?
One, I think in regards to, we haven't seen a reduction in earning, right? We're seeing all this cost of living, whatever, etc. But most companies are still calling higher earnings. And me personally, this 1%, 0.5% interest rate increases is not going to slow down the market for us to be in a quote unquote recession. Now, recession, I think, is going to be resolved in 12 months. I think the cost of living issue that we have.
Okay.
Now that is a different question. Okay. And that's what scares me. The cost of living scares me. And I can see that being a 3, even maybe 4 years problem. I don't think it's going to get back because a lot of these people's rents are going up. We're not going to see landlords saying,
Rents.
hey, yo, rent's going down now, down 50%. No, it's going to be what it is, right? And I don't see employers saying, oh, here's an additional 50% salary, 60% salary. So that cost of living element, for me, that's a big problem. And if we get into our reliance on debt, like the debt bubble, which we haven't seen that pop, if we get to 10, 20% interest rates, everything's burning. So, but in terms of recession, like, unfortunately, I feel like we've reached a place where no matter what, people are going to spend. And it's sad that that's the way that place we're in. I'm seeing record amount of people on my Instagram still flying. Like, no one on my Instagram is feeling recession in that sense. So in the true sense of recession, so reduction in GDP, I see it being a 12-month thing. But I think the bigger problem that we've got to resolve is the cost of living, which I think that might be a 3-4 years.
Daniel, your take?
I said mine. I think 18 to 24. I think it's going to be a long-term play. And I think we've seen from March early this year, especially in the US, a lot of QT, quantitative tightening, which is opposite to QE, what Pete was talking about, printing of money, where the central banks will start to reduce the number of financial assets on its balance sheet by sending them to financial markets. So they often let these bonds expire, won't purchase new bonds. And, from a 9 trillion to reducing to 6 trillion, that's a big decrease. But also, I just think, to all this point, cost of living is going to be an extensive period of time. And when you think about where we are now, these are ramifications from the pandemic to some degree. All these government loans, handouts, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone's got to pay for it. And whilst it's not said on the tin, here's free money, great. I'm now alleviated from this immediate short term, but long term, what are the ramifications going to be? So right now we're living, to what the UK government, the Treasury, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, has been doing. Yes, great, it's helped people, but doesn't mean we won't have consequences. And of course, when you're given such eloquent, wonderful speeches at a time of need, you're not going to say how we're going to pay it back. You're just saying, here's the money. Then 2 quarters later, we're going to increase tax rates. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. So yeah, it's going to be wild. I say it, but it's going to be wild because it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, sure.
But Daniel, thank you for sharing. And I think it's almost unfair to go last because it's very easy for me to say that my prediction would be in between or the average of the three of yours. But no, I think this has been a great conversation. The only thing that I would add my prediction is that I think it will get a lot worse before it starts to get better. I think in terms of the restructurings that we'll see in some of the larger companies, unemployment levels, I think this will get significantly worse than where we are today. And then only after then will we start to turn on the inflation and get better. And I think just holistically speaking, if you do zoom out a little bit, the human race, especially in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we have always been able to get our way out of it. So it's just something to keep in mind. Yes, on the news, there's a lot of doom and gloom. It does get tough, but we've got through 100% of the recessions that we've gone through in the past. And I don't assume that the human race won't get through it this time. And just the last comment I would add, and this is a compliment to my amazing colleagues in the call. I'm studying at Cambridge at the moment, and macroeconomics is a module that we have, and we're studying at the moment. And all the concepts that we've discussed are being picked up in the module. This conversation is on par with what is being discussed in class, guys. And you, the listeners, are getting this for free. So I hope with that, you remember to subscribe, leave a review, and make sure to follow us on every platform that you are doing on. I think with this, I'll give it over to Daniel to close out.
Thank you all for listening to episode 139 of Take Flight Podcast. We certainly hope that this has been an educational episode, very different to what we've put out in the past, especially sharing some personal stories, some insights, and also our view on current state of affairs and where we think the market on a global scale is going to be heading. As always, if you have any feedback for us, find us on Instagram at Take Flight Podcast, and be sure to check this episode out and all subsequent episodes on YouTube, where you can have a real live interactive experience with us all. Until next time, stay safe, God bless, keep well.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but